Hey folks, welcome to the show. I met up with Mark, Anthony and Wyatt earlier from the Cuckoo Town Podcast, and we decided to do a little collaboration all about the Gunpowder Plot of 1605. So we covered loads of it really, the sort of political conditions, the religious tension that had been boiling over since the Reformation. Who were the plotters? What were their motives? How was the plot executed? How were they discovered? And the aftermath, and lots of other little nuggets associated with the plot and the characters surrounding the plot, sort of on the edges. So it was good fun, good chat. I hope you enjoy it. If it gets a good response, maybe we'll do more of these sort of deeper dive videos and podcasts. So check out the links in the show notes, as always. You'll find a link to our show and Mark's show there. And see you next time. Okay. Be lucky.
So we were going to chat about the origins of Guy Fawkes Night, Bonfire Night.
That's right. I mean, you suggested that maybe it's something that's not particularly well known in the States.
That's right. Yeah, I know that for a fact because although there are some areas which do know about it, I believe that originally the English settlers that came over in the sort of 1600s, they basically took that, or the Protestants took it with them. But it was sort of I think it was outlawed actually, and it would make sense back in those times. But yeah, the American people I know, apart from Janice, they know very, very little, if nothing at all. And I remember when Janice first looked into it, she basically thought it was all a religious thing. Well, it is, as we know. But when we were growing up, and I don't know if it was the same with you. I mean, are you? Well, you don't have to answer this, but are you a Catholic?
I was raised Catholic, so I'm probably technically a lapsed Catholic.
Yeah. So, but you still celebrated Bonfire Night?
Yeah.
That's the thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's exactly how I feel, because when we were young, I had very, very little idea about anything like that. It was just a fun night where you burnt an effigy. We didn't really know who Guy Fawkes was. And I actually found out that it was at least 200 years before they put Guy Fawkes on the bonfires.
That's right.
It was the Pope.
Yeah, it was the Pope, an effigy of the Pope, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems outrageous now, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, when we were growing up, it was all about fireworks and treacle and making a guy, and there was something in the air. I don't know whether it was the smoke and all the fumes that we were putting out, but it was like a mist would descend on the country from the fireworks and the bonfires. There was a certain atmosphere, and you can still remember like the smells and the senses. And
I do. Yeah.
You would have toffee apples or treacle and go and stand around a bonfire. Usually like big communal bonfires by the time I was growing up.
Yeah.
People didn't really have, we didn't have enough room. We didn't have a garden really where you could have a proper bonfire. But places would set up, like schools would have a bonfire night and they'd raise money for school.
Yes.
Or the local rugby club used to put on a big do. Yeah. They'd have a big bonfire and a firework display and stuff like that. So it's a huge deal in the UK every year.
Yeah, we sort of caught it at a time of sort of transition really, because in the 70s, in the 60s, it was still a big thing. And I can remember looking up, and we lived in a country village just outside Guildford in southeast England, just for those listening in America, and or anywhere. And behind our house, although we lived in a council house, but those council, I mean, it's another story, but when Thatcher brought in this right to buy, those houses which we grew up in, these tiny council houses, but they're very nice, they're very well built houses. They had like tile hung, like red tiles halfway down the house. They're like very pretty,
Yeah.
although we didn't see it that way at the time. But they were selling those for like, well, I don't know what they are now, but they were up to like sort of 500,000 a few years ago. And it was a council house. We had it as a council house. Anyway, behind that house, there was around about 4 miles of countryside. So we had a river, a field, then this massive woods. So you can guess where we got all our wood from.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we would be collecting wood from probably a month, 6 weeks before. And just about everything went on those fires,
Yeah.
So there was a big one in the field behind us, which some older lads had built. Well, they did it every year, and it was hollowed out, so it was just like this massive sort of shelter, and it had sort of chairs shoved on the side of it, like old chairs and things. And then the guy was sat on top of it. I don't know who put the guy on. I don't know how I did that, but because it was about, I don't know, 25, 30 foot high. So, that's how. And looking up and down the road on the night, you could see fires like every other garden.
Wow. And
obviously fireworks and so on. And that, in fact, if you listen to that little conversation I sent you with an old friend, I only learned this the other day. We used to see these fireworks coming up behind the woods, right? We couldn't see over the woods. And I can remember my dad's, when we used to say, "Oh, where are the fireworks?" He said, "Oh, it's over the farm at the back." But it never really clicked until my friend the other day said, "Did you used to go to the big bonfire up East Shelford Lane?" And I'm like, "What?" And it's silly, really. I mean, I should have realised it, but he obviously had contacts with those people, which we didn't.
Right.
And he said, "Oh, it was great."
Oh, you missed out.
I missed out.
All those years.
I used to see the fireworks, coming up above the trees, but yeah, we had some fun with it.
Yeah.
Anyway, if you want to get back to the history, because I'm sure you're...
Yeah, we can do if you like. I mean, the big thing with this is, where do you start?
Yeah.
Do you start with the plot itself, the springing of the plot, and work your way back?
I would go a little bit further back.
Do you start with Elizabeth's excommunication then?
Yeah.
That's probably a good place to start. Otherwise, you end up going back to the Reformation and Henry VIII, and we'll be here till tomorrow.
Exactly. You're probably a lot better informed about the actual history. All I know is that before the event, sort of like 30, 40 years or whatever, the because as we know, there was like this ongoing sort of feud, if you like, between the Catholics and what would they were Protestants by that time, weren't they? Yep. So they were sort of in and out of power. And I thought it was look at what the English state did to those so-called terrorists, right? And then go back. They weren't the first. I mean, it was like the Catholics had been doing that to them. So it wasn't like the first blood or anything. It was like they'd been doing it to them already.
Yeah. We're dealing with the aftermath of the Reformation that goes on. It's amazing. It's like one of these butterfly effects of history, where you have a situation, what would in normal circumstances be a very normal, everyday situation. A man and his wife, they can't get pregnant. And under normal, everyday circumstances, that's just one of these things that happens in life sometimes. Yeah. But when the man is Henry VIII and the woman is Catherine of Aragon, their inability to sire an heir causes hundreds of years of religious tension and human suffering and political chaos across the entire continent.
Yeah, do you know, I've never really thought of that before.
It's insane. It's mental.
It is, yeah.
But that's the seeds of it, isn't it? It goes back to the Reformation. And like you mentioned about the Catholics giving it to the Protestants. So after Henry's young son, Edward, he dies, I think, at the age of 15. and Bloody Mary comes to the throne, and she's a staunch Catholic, and she's
Mary
burning
Queen of Scots. Yeah.
No, a Bloody Mary.
Oh right, different.
Bloody Mary, Henry VIII's daughter.
Oh right, okay.
Bloody Mary. She has about 5 years on the throne, and she's a staunch Catholic, and she's burning Protestants at the stake.
Right.
And then she dies from ill health, and that's when Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, comes.
Right.
Good Queen Bess, they used to call her.
Uh-huh.
And she's Protestant. So then the tables turn again.
Yes, yeah.
And we have all this religious tension. I mentioned she gets excommunicated. This is the big turning point. So in 1570, Elizabeth I gets excommunicated by the Pope. And this puts Catholics in England in a very difficult position because they have the Queen on one side and the Pope on the other.
Yes, yeah.
Who do you obey? The Pope is telling you one thing, the Queen is telling you the other.
Uh-huh.
All these laws, anti-Catholic laws, start being made, like you have to go to church service, Protestant church services. There's a law she makes where any priest who's trained outside of England is immediately classed as treasonous and is hung, drawn and quartered.
Oh my God.
And also, if you're caught harbouring a priest.
Yeah, yeah.
And this ties in, they call them the Jesuits, who start coming from Europe.
Right.
So they're being trained in Rome, they're being trained in Spain, and they're being sent over to Protestant England, these Catholic Jesuit priests. Okay. And they're often in disguise. So the famous case is Edmund Campion.
Oh, I've heard of him, yeah.
Well, the high school I went to used to be named after him. He was canonized. He was a saint. And when will it have been, Edmund Campion? I want to say probably 1580, early 1580s, I want to say.
Right.
We should also say, like, England's at war with Spain as well.
Right, yeah.
So that starts about 1580. Spain is Catholic.
Yes,
Elizabeth in England are Protestant. We have the failed invasion attempt of the Spanish Armada in 1588. And it was around 1580, I think, when the Jesuits started coming over more consistently.
Right.
And one of the main ones was Edmund Campion, and he was renowned as this really great public speaker. And he came disguised as a jeweler.
Right.
And he was found in the end and hung, drawn and quartered, martyred. But when these priests would arrive, there was like this network of Catholic houses, well-to-do houses, who would sort of meet them from the boat, harbour them in different houses, because
they had the hidey holes, didn't they?
The priest holes, famously the priest holes, because you need a Catholic priest to celebrate the Mass. You need someone who's trained, who's a guy who can do the sacraments.
The sacraments,
yeah, whether it's last rites or communion, the Eucharist or whatever. So Edmund Campion went to a lot of the houses of the fathers of the Gunpowder Plot conspirators.
Oh, right.
So Robert Catesby's father harboured him. Francis Tresham's father harboured him.
Right.
I think Thomas Winter's father harboured him as well.
Yeah, he had a brother as well, didn't he, Winter?
He did, yes.
Didn't it? Weren't they both involved, weren't they? Yeah.
He joined a bit later.
Yeah,
he joined the plot a bit later.
Yeah, the one that really I found quite touching was I think it was the servant of one of them who had accidentally stumbled across some information that this plot, and the poor lad had no choice.
Yeah, Tom Bates, that was.
Yeah, Bates, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, just what a position to be in. You don't want to find stuff out like that.
Heck no.
Not in those days.
No, because, I mean, the punishments are severe. There's the famous case, so even if you were harbouring a priest, they had all these laws brought in, and they were called recusants, the Catholics who wouldn't abide by the laws.
Yes, yeah.
And it was they'd pay fines or be in prison. There was a lot of these conspirators in the Gunpowder Plot that were very wealthy.
Right.
And they could afford to pay these fines, but others, unfortunately, couldn't do.
No.
So there's a famous case of Margaret Clitheroe.
Right.
And she was in York, and she was accused of harbouring a priest, and which she refused to answer the charge. And the punishment for that was to be pressed to death.
Oh.
And they would either get you to lie down, or they would stake out your arms and legs, splayed out.
Yeah.
And then they'd get your front door, put it on top of you, and then slowly add weight to the door.
Yeah.
So your ribs just gave way, you were crushed.
Yeah.
And she's now a saint. She was canonized by the Catholic Church. And I don't know if you've ever been to York. It's one of my favourite places to go.
I have, yeah.
There's a little street there called the Shambles.
Yes, I remember it, yeah.
It's a famous street because it's like going back to the 17th century. It's like it's been sort of kept like a time capsule. And if you go down the Shambles, one of the houses has a shrine to Margaret Clitheroe.
Oh, right.
And it's reported that one of the houses, I forget which number it is, was her shop. She was the wife of a butcher.
Right.
And she was one of these people who took this punishment.
Yeah, strangely enough, I haven't been there for so many years. I think it was 89. Something like 88, 89. Whatever year it was, I could check it, because the reason it sticks in my mind was we were driving up there from the southeast of England, and the car broke down in Leicester, I think it was. And we'd been planning to just go to York for the weekend. And we thought, well, shall we go back home somehow, or shall we just carry it? So we managed to get a coach from Leicester up to York. And when I was on the coach, I remember reading about this attack that just happened. So it is linked. It was an IRA attack on the Horse Guards down in London.
Right.
And I remember the horror of it. I can remember reading this paper on the way up to York. So that sort of ties in with it, but it's like you said earlier, but it's like it was because of these earlier events that this stuff was still happening.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's like a thread through history.
Yeah.
So York, I mean, amazing. I remember a little pub there, and I can't remember the name of it, but it's just an amazing little pub, and the beer's good. Anyway, I'm going off the subject. So
yeah, so I mean, you get an idea of how the sort of religious and political tension that's sort of brewing in the country, and if you look at things from the Protestant perspective, you can see why. Towards the end of Elizabeth's reign, there was all sorts of plots that were on her life, plots to poison her and stuff.
Well, when James I, he was a king of Scotland as well, wasn't he?
It was James VI of Scotland became James I of England.
Yeah. Well, didn't they expect him to be more lenient, and they were expecting more from him? And then, of course, they realised after 2 years or something, it's not going to happen.
This is part of the frustration.
Yeah.
That led to the plotters. So like how I mentioned, a number of the plotters, their fathers were persecuted under Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Elizabeth dies in 1603. And before James even comes down to the throne, one of the conspirators, Thomas Percy, went up to see James.
Yeah.
And
I know about Thomas Percy. He was at Prudhoe.
He was what?
He was at Prudhoe Castle in northeast England.
Right.
Which used to be just down the road from me at one point.
Oh.
But that's I know a little bit about the Percys.
Yeah, they're a well-to-do family. Very well connected.
Very powerful in the northeast of England. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah.
He was sort of the money man in a lot of ways behind the plot.
Right.
But I mean, he went up to speak to James, and he sort of came away thinking, like you said, that James was going to be more lenient. Yeah. James's wife, Queen Anne, is Catholic at this time.
Right.
James's mother, Mary Queen of Scots, she was a Catholic martyr.
Right.
I mean, the execution of Mary Queen of Scots is a hell of a story. I'm almost tempted to.
Is that the one with a blunt axe?
Well, it's not blunt. It slips off the knot of the blindfold. Right. So, okay, you're looking puzzled.
Oh, I think I have heard this. It's horrendous, isn't it?
Oh, it's horrendous. Yeah.
Yeah.
She
Oh dear.
All right, let's do it. Let's go. Elizabeth.
I'm sure there's some people who want to hear it.
Elizabeth the First. She's quite reticent to sign the death warrant for Mary, Queen of Scots, and she's been in prison for years. And finally, Lord Burleigh sort of convinces her. Basically, it's time to go. Him and Francis Walsingham, who's Elizabeth's spy master,
right?
They uncover a plot that Mary's Queen of Scots is supposedly, wanting to act on.
But how can she do anything from her cell? Or the cellar, or whatever.
There's a great book. Just before I read this earlier in the year or late last year. It's called Elizabeth's Spy Master by Robert Hutchinson.
Oh, right. Okay.
And it's all about Francis Walsingham.
Right.
And it's incredible how sophisticated his network is.
Right.
He has spies, informants, men on his payroll right across Europe. He's got him in the Vatican. He's got him in every royal court in Europe. He's got him in Mary Queen of Scots' sort of retinue. It's just incredible. It's like an early MI6, And he's a complete workaholic. Yeah. He's one of these guys constantly writing letters all day until, he finally collapses. Really brilliant guy. And one of when I say brilliant, I mean intellectually brilliant, not morally brilliant.
Well, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? But a talented guy, maybe.
And obviously passionate as well.
Passionate, Protestant.
Loves his job.
Yeah, and one of the main sort of... him and Lord Burleigh, William Cecil, are always sort of trying to guide Elizabeth to be wary of the Catholic threat. And you could say with good reason, because Walsingham was in Paris on the day of the St. Bartholomew Day massacre in Paris.
Yes. Yeah.
And that was in 1570s, early 1570s.
Right.
And it was this event where the Catholics basically ran amok and slaughtered thousands of the Huguenots, the Protestant Huguenots.
Yeah.
And for some reason, Francis Walsingham was on secondment at the time in Paris, and he witnessed all this. And they said, the River Seine run red with blood, when this happened.
Yeah.
And, that was enough motivation for Walsingham to take the Catholic threat in England seriously.
Very seriously, yeah.
Anyway, they finally nail Mary Queen of Scots. They get the death warrant signed, and they're having a trial, and then the execution. It's happening at Fotheringay, which is north of London. It's sort of practically in the Midlands, I think.
Right.
And they get the best executioner in the land is a guy called Bull, and they ship him up, and it's time for the execution. And one of Mary Queen, there's shock originally because Mary takes off her sort of main garment and she's wearing a bright red petticoat underneath. And there's gasps of astonishment because red is associated with Catholicism, and it's like a big to everyone around them,
Yeah.
So she gets stripped off, and one of her attendees gets like a blindfold, like a silk blindfold, puts it across Mary's eyes. Right. She puts her head on the chopping block. Bull comes over, raises the axe down like that, and the story is that the axe hits the knot on the blindfold and slips and buries in the back of her head.
Oh.
And they just hear a whimpering sound. So then he has another go. And the axe goes up again, and this time it connects with the neck. And there's just a sinew keeping the head attached to the body.
Right.
So he gets down on his knees, gets rid of that. Then he holds the head up for all to see.
Right.
Without realising that she's wearing a wig. And the head drops to the floor.
Oh, right.
It starts rolling around the floor. It's incredible.
Oh my God, that's dreadful, isn't it?
It's grisly, yeah.
Yeah.
But this is what life was like by then. Life was grisly.
Horrible.
And the people, eyewitnesses, said her lips were moving for like 15 minutes afterwards.
Do you think that was just, well, it's just nerve damage? I don't know.
You'd hope so, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But no one will ever be able to tell us one way or the other because no one's come back, have they?
Well, it reminds me of, did you ever watch The Young Ones?
Yeah, yeah.
Do you remember the scene with, was it Rick Mail when his, no, you know what I'm going to say about the head coming off? There's a sign on the railway carriage door. It says, "Do not lean out the window." I wonder why they say that. Head goes out, train goes by, boom.
Oh my God.
And then he goes to collect it, doesn't he? Yeah. And the head looks up at him and says, "You took your time, you bastard." Do you remember that?
Yeah. Yeah, I know someone who was in the Young Ones, actually.
Really? Who's that?
Yeah, he played in Alexis Sale's band. And Alexis Sale's band was on the Young Ones in a couple of episodes.
Yeah, I do remember. I don't remember the actual one, but yeah. While we're on atrocities and so on, I remember reading online probably a few years ago that when they got the I don't think some of them were killed in shootouts. There was one where they actually only had cutlasses, and you don't bring cutlasses to a gunfight, you know. So I thought that when I was reading it, you know. But I remember reading somewhere that one of them, possibly Guido, because that's something not a lot of people would know. We know obviously, but his real name is Guido, Guiuido, I think it was. But he'd thrown himself off the scaffold because he thought it would be a quicker way of going because he knew what was coming.
Yeah.
I mean, the bravery, I know you've got a choice then, but the bravery to do that. But then I think, I don't know, I'd like to think I would be brave enough just to do it because it's better than the option, isn't it?
Well, yeah, the punishment was for the conspirators, the ones who weren't shot or killed at Holbeach, at the Holbeach House standoff.
That was one of those Catholic safe houses, yeah?
Yeah. Up in the Midlands, I think?
Yeah, I think
it was up in the Midlands.
Near Leicester, wasn't it?
I think so.
Near Leicester? Somewhere like that.
So. But yeah, if the conspirators who were caught, like Guy Fawkes, they were hung, drawn and quartered. Yeah. So they were tied to a board and then dragged by a horse from the tower to wherever they were being executed. Some of them were executed opposite the House of Lords, ironically.
Yeah, was it the palace grounds or something? The old palace grounds, something like that.
There was two places. The executions took place over 2 days in two different places. I can't remember exactly the names of them. But yeah, they were dragged by a horse from the tower to there. Then they were hung, but cut down quick before they would die. Right. And then it was genitals cut off, entrails taken out and burnt, and then chopped up into pieces. Oh, it's horrific.
Yeah. Horrible.
Yeah. And I heard that story that when, Guy Fawkes was dragged by the horse, when he was going up the gallows, he climbed up and then jumped off to break his own neck.
Yeah. And is that the truth? Is that what happened?
That's what I heard. That's what I've read.
But I've read it recently and I can't I've looked for it recently and not found it.
Yeah. I mean, we're sort of restricted to eyewitness accounts and stuff, aren't we, from the period?
Yeah.
So there's no reason to doubt that.
No.
No reason to doubt that. Yeah. I mean, that's how desperate it is because he didn't want to be conscious for the...
No, who would?
Also, he's been tortured as well before this.
Yes. Yeah, but I saw his signature.
Oh, my God.
You could tell how, it was shaky, like somebody with, I don't know, Parkinson's or something. It was awful. Yeah,
there's two signatures. There's one before the torture and one after the torture, and they don't even look like they're written by the same guy.
No,
I'd say torture was not commonly done in this period. No, it had to be signed off by the king or like a privy council member. It wasn't. It wasn't at the time. From what we're told, it wasn't conducted sort of at will. It was a big deal to torture someone. And there's you can see the record that James writes, and he says, he shall be tortured, but, with the small means at first, increasing by degree.
Right.
And he gave permission for the rack to be used as well.
Right.
I don't know whether, because there's a story about the 3 degrees of torture. I don't know if you've heard that.
No.
Because like those buddy cop movies where they say, we're going to give you the 3rd degree.
Oh, right. That's where it comes from.
Yeah, and it was sort of standardized by, I think it was Queen Catherine of Austria in, I want to say that the 1800s.
Right.
Early 1800s. She sort of standardized the 3 degrees of torture that were sanctioned. And the first degree was thumb screws.
Yeah.
So they'd take the thumbs in this device and they would gradually tighten a screw on the thumbnail until it exploded. This is a gruesome episode, this, isn't it? The 2nd degree of torture, they'd strip your top half, strip your clothes off your top half, tie you to a ladder, and then they would light a candle sort of under your armpit that would slowly burn you.
Yeah.
That was the 2nd degree. And the 3rd degree, they would tie your hands behind your back with a rope. And then from that rope, they would take a long piece up and over a beam. And they would pull on that rope to lift your arms up.
So would they pop out the joints?
Oh, to the point where people would pull you off the ground and then someone else would come and hang off your legs.
Oh.
So it would completely dislocate your shoulders. And if you manage to if you manage to go through the 3 degrees without confessing, good job, you're innocent.
That's almost like the witchcraft thing where they were ducking.
Yeah. Yeah, what was that again? The witchcraft one with the duck.
Yeah, they something like if they sunk, if they sunk,
they're innocent.
Yeah, so they couldn't win anyway. That's the point anyway. They couldn't win.
No.
Yeah, dreadful business, horrible.
Yeah, so I don't know. Should we go on to the actual plot itself?
Yeah, have we got time?
How are you for time?
I'm fine.
I'm all right for time. All right, let's go on. Sorry, Mark.
Well, I mean, I don't know. You're doing really well with it at the moment. So, I mean, okay. So I understand they were under the actual. They'd rented a little coal cellar or something underneath, but it wasn't like it would be today. Obviously, with all the security and cameras and everything. And there was even a brothel down there somewhere. There were little shops.
The brothels were outlawed in the 1550s or 1560s.
Oh, right. But I read that there was one down there.
Oh, maybe there was an odd one. Maybe some clandestine brothels existed after.
Maybe.
But it was a rabbit warren. It wasn't like it wasn't like the Westminster we see today. It was a mesh of tunnels, houses, shops, pubs, and the palaces of Westminster as well, all interlinked and
right.
Yeah, I mean, the first sort of meeting takes place at the Duck and Drake pub, which and this is like a year before. This is like 1604.
Right. That's right. I read that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the spring of 1604. And there's only, I think, 5 plotters originally. You've got Robert Catesby, who's the main man.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Whose father was persecuted.
Yeah.
They're all expecting great things from James.
Right.
We sort of bypass that. But James comes to power, and then there's 2 plots. There's the by-plot and the main plot. The main plot was Walter Raleigh was involved in. And these were Catholic plots to get rid of James.
Right.
And so when that happens, all these recusant laws come back in, these laws about Catholics and priest holes and punishments and fines and all the rest of it. And that's like the final straw for Catesby. It's like, Elizabeth...
I'm just saying they've exhausted their patience. They can't see anything working in their favour.
No.
And they just think, we just got to do something.
Yeah.
But I was just going to mention Guido himself. He was born a Protestant, and then his father died, and his mother remarried a Catholic, which sort of had converted him. So he that was really an accident of
Fate.
Fate. Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's one of the early plotters. He's recruited in Flanders because after he converts to Catholicism, he sort of stands around. He sort of sticks with it for about 10 years and then says, "I've had enough of this. I'm joining the Spanish army." Yeah. And he goes to.
So he's fighting for the Pope in the Low Countries.
Yeah, against the Dutch.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And this makes him a perfect guy for the plotters because.
Yeah.
Go on.
No, it's after you. Oh,
yeah. The other main plotters are well known. They're wealthy guys.
But he's not.
He's been out of the country for 10 years. He's not a known face. People don't know who he is. Catesby's well known, especially to the authorities. I mean, these are guys who have been paying fines. The fathers have been persecuted. Yeah. You can imagine that early Walsingham, they've all got spies all around. They're monitoring these guys.
Right.
But Guy Fawkes, he's been out of the country for 10 years. He's a good guy. Plus, he's a military man. He knows about gunpowder.
He does, yeah. That's what I was going to say. He knew all about it. He'd been using it for years.
Yeah. He'll know about siege warfare. He'll know about logistics, how to move it safely and all this sort of stuff. He's the perfect guy. And he's the odd man out as well because he's of relatively low birth.
Right.
Whereas Catesby and Thomas Percy, Thomas Winter, they're all from very wealthy...
upper class people, yeah.
Yeah, generally from the Midlands or the North.
Right.
And they've all got land and they can afford to pay these fines for being recusants. In fact, the recusants, the Catholics who maybe couldn't afford to pay these fines and sort of went along with these laws and went to the church services... Right. The recusants derisively called them church papists.
Oh, right.
And there's a story, like they would do tricks. They would play mental games to sort of take them out of the mass, like crossing your fingers while they were saying the mass. And there was even a story of one guy who had cloth in his ears, a Catholic who had cloth in his ears, and it always made me wonder. I used to get cold cloth ears as a kid. Did you used to get cold cloth ears?
Occasionally, yeah.
So, like when you're a kid, if you didn't do if you weren't listening to your mum and dad, they'd say, "Oh, your cloth ears."
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it, how these things come down through history? Yeah.
Well, this is it. I don't know if it comes from the church papists or whether maybe it's tied to the First World War, where the soldiers used to wrap their heads in cloth wadding when the big guns were going off.
Yes, it could be.
Yeah, so I don't know.
There's another one I could tell you about. My dad used to often, I think nearly all the time really, he would call the toilet or the bathroom, as they say in America, because they're very sensitive about these things. They never say toilet. It's always the bathroom. Oh, can I use your bathroom? Why, are you dirty? But anyway, back in Britain, it's the loo or the bog sometimes for bog.
Yep.
And my dad used to call it the Khazi.
Yep.
Khazi. And I found out where that came from. It came from the Boer War.
Really?
Yeah, it came. So the old soldiers had come back from the Boer War, which was like, the English imperialists fighting the Dutch imperialists over the African continent.
Yeah.
So, Khazi, definitely, it was an Afrikaans term. So like Dutch Afrikaans.
Really? Wow, I never knew that.
Yeah, Khazi. And I've always liked that expression, Khazi.
Yeah. Yeah, bog, we use bog in our house.
Yeah, bog's quite common, isn't it?
Well, I'm quite common, Mark.
I didn't mean common like that. I meant
I know what you meant.
Yeah,
I'm pulling your leg. I'm pulling your leg. I wonder where I'm pulling your leg comes from.
Yeah,
maybe when you get that's from when you get in the third degree and someone hangs off your legs.
That's right.
So anyway, right, let's go back to the Duck and Drake. Otherwise, we're never going to get through this.
It's funny. I shouldn't really bring this up, but I remember years ago seeing a piece where somebody, I don't know if you know where I'm going, was we were talking about stretching the limbs and everything, right? And there was a thing about blokes stretching their John Thomas,
Wow.
by attaching weights to it.
Oh, my word.
I
Don't
wonder
try
where they
this
got
at
the
home.
idea. No, don't try this at home, young men.
Dear me. Does it work though? I might give it a go.
Didn't work for me.
Right. So let's go back. Let's get back on track.
Yeah. Okay.
It's the year before the plot. So the plot happens in 1605, November 1605.
Yeah.
James the First is king. If you like your Bibles, the King James version of the Bible, it's that King James.
That King James, right?
Yeah. So it's the era of Francis Bacon and Walter Raleigh and Count Richelieu. He's a young man at this point over in France. He's like in his 20s when this is happening. So it's this period.
Right.
So anyway, the year before in the spring, they have this meeting. Catesby, who's fed up, absolutely fed up.
This is Duck and Drake.
This is Duck and Drake. Yeah, it's in. I think it's in the spring of 1604. The year before.
Was it Old Holborn? Holborn, is it Holborn? I'm not sure now. Or was it? No, it was actually near the palace, wasn't it?
Near off the Strand, apparently.
Oh, right.
Apparently, it was off the Strand, but it's one of these things where we don't really know.
So it's long gone.
It's long gone, yeah. Right. And the sort of the main five conspirators meet there. You've got Robert Catesby, Jack Wright, Thomas Percy, who's the really well-connected guy,
right?
Thomas Winter, and Guy Fawkes. Right. And this is where Robert Catesby said the only way to sort of end this is to blow them all up with powder. Right. And so that's when the sort of plan is first set in motion. Curiously, in like the next room, there's a Catholic service happening, and it's some people believe they took communion while they were there. Now, I'm not sure which priest it was, whether it was Henry Garnet or John Gerard or Tessimond. The three main priests are involved in this situation.
Right.
But apparently there was a service going on next door and they took communion. So, okay, we know what we're going to do. We're going to get this. So they start getting the powder and stuff. And Thomas Percy, as you mentioned earlier, he has a house in Westminster that he has the lease on. So that's where they start moving the powder to, Guy Fawkes. And throughout this whole plot, Parliament keeps getting, the state opening of Parliament keeps getting prorogued, which is this horrible constitutional term in the UK. It just means it's getting put off. It's being postponed.
Right.
And this keeps giving them more time. And it means the plot keeps getting expanded and more people get sucked into it. So, they start moving the powder. Moving the powder turns out to be a bigger job, so they recruit a couple of other guys, Robert Keyes and the servant you mentioned, Tom Bates.
Yes, yeah.
That's where they come in to sort of help Guy Fawkes. And it keeps getting delayed. What does that mean? Well, with more time for plotting.
Yeah, and more time to be found out as well, you know.
Yeah. So. Well, this is where, when it gets prorogued in 1605, all of a sudden they have this summer of 1605 where they're basically waiting. And that's when they go up to the Midlands and try and rally support. And they come up with this second half of the plot. And basically the second half of the plot is to kidnap James's daughter, Elizabeth, who's about 8 or 9 at this time.
Right.
We're going to kidnap her. She's been held in like Coventry. She's staying in like Coventry. She's miles away. And we will put her in as a Catholic queen with a regent, probably the Duke of Northumberland, someone like that, someone in the north. And we'll sort of gather as many people as we can from the north and the Midlands to stage an uprising. And it's audacious, really.
Right.
This idea of a Midlands uprising. But, this is where more people get sucked into the plot. So Jack Wright's brother Kit, he gets brought into the plot. Thomas Winter's brother Robert, he comes into the plot, and John Grant, who I don't think we know much about. And because of this sort of extension in the plot, they're thinking about an uprising and horses and arms and
Right.
With the proroguing keeps setting things back. They're running out of money. They're needing more money. And that's when they bring sort of the last three guys in. Everard, Digby, Ambrose Rookwood, and Tresham, the last guy to come on board. Francis Tresham. And this is only like a month. This is like September 1605 when he comes on board. Right. And he's proper reticent. He says he thinks Catesby's mad, and he tries to talk him out of it. He even offers to pay him to go to Europe and just forget about all this.
Yeah.
And
how and he ended up being killed as one of the conspirators, did he? Or was it in a shootout?
All of these guys, none of these guys survived.
Really?
They were either killed at Holbeach House or they were found afterwards.
Yeah.
The only people who survived were a couple of the priests who knew what was going on. So because this is being expanded in this summer of 1605, more and more people are finding out about it. There's a pilgrimage in Wales, St. Winifred's Well, which happens in August-September of 1605. And one of the conspirators is there, Ambrose, plus Anne Vokes, who's one of these women who is like a shepherd for the priests. She's part of this network of recusants who harbour priests. Right. And Henry Garnet is there, and he's the superior of the Jesuits in England.
Oh, right.
Henry Garnet, he's an important guy. And as they're going on this pilgrimage, they sort of stay at friends' houses on the way. And I think it's at Ambrose Rookwood's house where they stop. And this Anne Vokes, she notices the war horses in the stable.
Right.
And she says something to Henry Garnet, the head of the Jesuits. She says, I'm going to forget the words, but she says something like, "These wild heads have something ominous planned. For God's sake, Henry, talk to Catesby, talk him out of it."
All right.
So they know something's coming up.
Yeah.
And even Catesby's not immune to this sort of thing. He gives a confession to his personal priest, who is, what was his name? What's the priest? I'm sure I said it before. Tessimond. Yeah, Catesby's priest is Tessimond. And he gives a confession to Tessimond about the plot. And it's funny. It's a funny sort of technical thing because it's classed as a walking confession. It's not in a confessional box.
Right.
So Tessimond tells Henry Garnet, the head of the Jesuits. And Henry Garnet doesn't notify the authorities. He refuses to break the sanctity of confession.
Right.
But he goes out of his way to talk Catesby out of it.
Right.
And he ends with Garnet convincing Catesby to wait until Garnet has sent a man to Rome to talk to the Pope and get the Pope's advice. And Catesby agrees. He said, "I won't do anything till your man comes back from Rome." And he didn't hold his promise. He went ahead anyway.
Right. Interesting. I didn't know any of that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's wild.
And after the executions and the shootout and so on, all these Catholic safe houses and all the people that, these sort of wealthier Catholics that were looking after these people, was there like retribution on all of them? Persecution coming up? And
the people who were part of the plot, they lost all their holdings.
Right.
All their lands were confiscated. And people who weren't involved with the plot, like the leader of the Jesuits, Henry Garnet, right. he was hung, drawn, and quartered. They pinned it on him.
Right.
They wanted to make
examples of them.
Yeah, and get maximum political capital.
Yes.
Out of the situation.
Yeah.
Even though by this time of the plot, things have calmed down with Spain. James, early in his reign, gets a ceasefire. He agrees a ceasefire with King Philip III, I think it would be, of Spain.
Right.
And so they agree a ceasefire, and things are improving on that front. But still, having that political capital of a Catholic plot. See, this is why I wonder just how much the state knew about this plot. And never let a good crisis go to waste.
No, exactly.
And we'll just stop it just when we need to.
Yeah.
We'll let them, we get the bonus of all the land and all the holdings.
Yeah, yeah.
And we get this political capital.
Yeah, and also it's a bit like you're fishing, and you're sort of luring in others, because the longer they let it go, there'll be more coming in, and get rid of all of them in one go.
Yeah, yeah.
It's good thinking, really.
And it's not like the British state wasn't sophisticated enough to do things like that. We know from reading about Walsingham and Lord Burleigh that they were master plotters.
Yeah.
And conspirators themselves.
Yeah.
One of the big things that sort of blew open the plot, I told you before, I got a print of the Monteagle Letter.
Yes. Yeah.
And we don't know who wrote it. It was used with a disguised handwriting, right. and it wasn't signed.
There was a name. I had it jotted down. I probably can't read my scroll. I should have been a doctor. My writing is so untidy. Yeah, I'll probably find it later when I don't need to.
Some people say it was Treason.
Yes.
Because
I had another name written down somewhere. Anyway, carry on.
Yeah. Well, Lord Monteagle is Tresham's uncle, I think. And he would have been present at the state opening of Parliament. And Monteagle receives this letter maybe 10 days before the state opening of Parliament. And it's a warning letter. I'll read it, shall I?
Yeah, it's just basically asking him to steer clear of the building, isn't it?
Yeah. My lord, out of the love I bear to some of your friends, I have care of your preservation. Therefore, I would advise you, as you tender your life, to devise some excuse to shift your attendance at this Parliament, for God and man hath concurred to punish the wickedness of this time. And think not slightly of this advertisement, but retire yourself into the country where you may expect the event in safety. For though there may be no appearance of any stir, yet I say they shall receive a terrible blow this Parliament, and yet they shall not see who hurts them. This council is not to be condemned, because it may do you good, and can do you no harm, for the danger is past as soon as you have burnt this letter. And I hope God will give you the grace to make good use of it, to whose holy protection I commend you. So it's an anonymous tip-off.
Tip-off, yeah.
Don't go to the country, get out of London. So what does Monteagle do? He gives it straight to Burleigh, gives it straight to the, James's right-hand man.
Yeah.
So this is where sort of searches start,
Yeah.
So they need to start searching Parliament to find out. We should say at this point, because we left the story with the gunpowder in Thomas Percy's house.
Yeah, and they'd been shifting it over to this cellar, and there was a lot of firewood down there, wasn't there? Rather a lot.
Well, conveniently, this sort of undercroft becomes, the lease opens for it, and it's directly under the House of Lords. And Thomas Percy snaffles it up. And that's when they start moving it across. Yeah, 36 barrels of gunpowder.
Yeah. What's that? 2.5 ton, I think it works out at, something like that.
I read
2.5 ton?
I read 1 ton, but
1 ton. Yeah.
We're estimating. I mean, from what I've read, like modern ballistics guys say that if that had gone off, it would have destroyed the entire House of Lords and everything and anyone within 100 meters.
Wow.
And this isn't like an average day at Parliament. This is the state opening of Parliament. So you've got the king there, the queen, the princes. Yeah. You've got all the bishops, all the lords, all the members of Parliament, all the judges.
Yeah.
And all the records, all the parliamentary records, all your statutes, all your laws up in flames. I mean, it's a complete decapitation of the state.
Yeah. And then you've got all the ordinary people just going about their lives, just regular people.
Yeah.
Who just happen to be in that area.
In that summer of 1605, where Parliament's prorogued, Catesby approaches Henry Garnet, the head of the Jesuits, with a hypothetical question, He says, is it ever justified to kill innocents? And Henry Garnet says, in a just war? Maybe. And this upset Henry Garnet because people are getting wind that something's coming, and this is what shakes him up. Like, this guy's planning something.
Yeah.
So yeah, it would have been unimaginable if it had actually happened. What would have happened? The chaos that would have ensued. You would have no law. How do you enforce a law if you don't have a physical copy? It's like today we keep physical copies of all the laws of the land, you know.
Yeah. It would be just like starting again almost, wouldn't it?
That was the plan. And then put Elizabeth on the throne, a Catholic monarch. I mean, it was doomed to fail from the start. It was too audacious, really. You know, some people say it started out as just a lashing out of frustration. And then the second half of the plot, it was sort of delusions of grandeur, and we're going to restart with a Catholic monarch. It was never
sensible.
Yeah, and they sent emissaries to Spain as well to try and get support from Spain. You know, we've got X amount of thousand Catholics here who will help. You know, I don't think they ever told them about the plot, but they said that maybe something would be coming, and you know, if you want to send, you know, this might be a good time to send some ships over. But like I said, the peace treaty, the ceasefire had already been signed. Spain had already been massively stung by the Spanish Armada in 1588. They'd lost all their maritime power at that point.
Was this the big storm?
Yeah. I mean, it's just completely botched invasion.
Yeah,
you know, it was that was sort of the nail in the coffin of it was an attempted invasion of England by Spain.
Did you know they did that in Cornwall? Mm. Yeah, down in Penzance. 15. It was around about that time. I can't remember without looking. It was 15, maybe a few years before that, and it was just like one ship, and I think it's just one ship. And they landed at Penzance, Mousehole, which is next door, Newlyn. They landed at Penzance. They burnt down a village called Poole, which is still there today. You know, replacement of it. And there were sort of local legends. Sorry, my throat's going. Excuse me.
It's that mist in the Pacific Northwest. It's getting to
you. Yeah. There were legends that, in fact, even when I was young, when I first went down to Cornwall, my dad pointed this out to me, and he said, if you when you're in Penzance or around St Ives, anywhere around there, just look around you, you'll see people that look, how can I put this? It's like racial stereotyping, but it wasn't a racist thing. It was just a historic thing, who look sort of swarthy, Spanish looking, right? Yeah. And he said this is, the story he'd heard. He didn't say it was true. He just said this is what has been handed down, and it was in books and everything. That when they landed, they raped a lot of women, and maybe it wasn't always rape. Who knows? But and there were some very swarthy-looking people come out of that. Now it's serious that I when I was younger in the 70s, I did see that around Penzance quite a lot. I did see that. In fact, I went to a job interview in Helston in Cornwall, not that far away. And this was in the 80s, I think. And I was being interviewed by these two guys for a salesman selling building materials. And one of them he'd come up from Penzance, from another smaller branch, to interview me. And he was 100% that stereotype.
Yeah.
And I got him talking about his family history and stuff. And he said, yeah, I've been in Penzance all my life. So with my family, so it's my parents' parents. And I didn't say to him what I was thinking, but I was thinking, well, I wonder if that's true then, you know, because
yeah, it could be.
But I've noticed in recent years when I've been there, I don't see it at all now. And I don't know whether that's just because the place is more open up to outside influences anyway, and it wasn't so much, you know, 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah. So
I don't know if there's any truth in it, but this could be.
It's just as well those Spanish didn't land in Hartlepool. You know,
yeah, they hung the monkey, didn't they? Yes, I've heard about that.
Yeah, there was a
Monkey swingers. They used to call them monkey swingers.
monkey hangers.
Oh, monkey hangers. Sorry. Yeah,
That's right.
monkey
Yeah,
hangers.
there was a monkey washed up on the shores of Hartlepool.
They didn't know what it was. They thought it was a Spanishman or something, didn't
They thought it was a French spy,
they? Yeah.
so they hung it. And Hartlepool's football team or soccer team is still called the Monkey Hangers.
Yeah, by other teams.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh, funny joke. Oh, dear, Monkey Hangers.
But when the Spanish landed in Cornwall, it was just like a raid. It wasn't. There was no intention of stopping, and I think they burnt down this village. They'd caused quite a lot of destruction, and I don't know whether they killed many people, but I presume they did, a few anyway. And then word got to London or Portsmouth, probably, and they sent a ship down or sent ships down. And the story goes that these Royal Navy vessels, you've got to imagine, as you know, they were the most powerful navy in the world at the time. And they sent these ships down, and supposedly they saw them coming at a distance, and they did a runner. Right. They managed to get off the mainland, get in their ship, and clear off. They only just got away, really. Wow. So it's worth reading up on that one. 15. When was the Great Armada? Was that
1588?
1588. I think this was. It wouldn't have been after that, would it?
I wouldn't have thought so.
No. I'll have
Probably
to check
before.
on that one. Yeah.
Yeah, there was various incursions going on before that. Francis Drake famously harassed the Spanish. He was just rampaging across Spain, just, decimating Spanish ports and ships at will, seemingly, and that's why he became so famous as a commander, admiral, whatever.
Yeah, he was more of a pirate, wasn't he, really?
Yeah, I would say so, yeah.
I think so, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was Royal Navy sort of comes out of that sort of like privateer sort of seagoing tradition where they, the spoils of war, they
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even if you come up to Trafalgar, they were taking the vessels back. That was 200 years later. They were taking the vessels back, and then it got hit by a storm. It's funny how these storms seem to come up. And actually, the English people, especially back in the 1600s or whatever, they took that as a sign that God was with them. That they were. What's like the Americans have a term for it as well, don't they? They have a different term, manifest destiny, isn't it?
Right, manifest destiny. Yeah. The Elizabethans would have called it divine providence.
Yes, yeah. So it's funny how these storms sort of do crop up, and if it works in your favour, oh God, we've God on our side,
Well, the plotters, they considered it divine providence that this Undercroft became available for lease directly under the House of Lords.
Yes,
it was. They saw that as a sign from God.
Sign from God, yeah.
Yeah, that he was on their side, and he was sort of condoning this attempt, this slaughter, essentially.
Yeah.
But yeah, so anyway, let's go back to the Monteagle Letter.
Yeah.
So Cecil gets this letter, this anonymous tip-off. And King James is off hunting somewhere, so he doesn't bother him.
Right.
He waits for James to come back. And James is given the credit for decoding the letter that it's a plot to use powder. The Stuart family has a bad relationship with gunpowder. James's father was killed by gunpowder. Right. He was assassinated. So, yeah, James, according to the state, James figures that out, like, this is a plot. So this is when the searching starts. And the Monteagle, who receives the letter, him and a few others, they start searching Westminster.
Yeah.
And like we were describing before, it's a complete maze, of places. And they stumble across Guy Fawkes. And he tells him he's an employee of Thomas Percy.
Yeah, and he called himself John Johnson.
John Johnson.
Great, isn't it?
I'm John Johnson. And they let him go. They don't. They leave it.
Right.
And then they go back to James. Now, this is the story. Now, I think, and I'm not a historian or an expert, but I think this is Cecil letting James take the credit, because Cecil is a very smart guy, like his father. And so they bring news of this John Johnson.
Yeah, and it would have given him brownie points to, oh, here, you can have this one. You can say you did this.
Absolutely.
It'll make you look intelligent.
And hey, to be fair, he was no slouch either. James I was a smart guy.
Right.
But yeah, the story goes that Cecil takes it to King James, and he says, "No, go back there and search properly." And so they do. And this is the midnight, early hours of the morning, November 5th, where this small party, they find Guy Fawkes there. He's wearing spurs for a horse.
Right.
He's got matches. He's got a watch. And they find 36 barrels of gunpowder. Case closed.
I shouldn't laugh, but it is quite funny when you look at it like that. It's like, I mean, what was he going to say?
Well, do you know, it is, I'm John Johnson. That's what he said, basically. And I work for Thomas Percy. But at his interrogation, he was asked what he was planning to do. And his words, this might not be exact, but his words were, "I was going to blow you Scotch beggars back to the mountains you came from."
Ooh.
So, yeah, he wasn't one to mince his words.
Yeah, he's very brave as well. I mean, he knew what was coming.
Absolutely. Once he was caught.
Yeah. So I suppose they couldn't make it any worse, could they really?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, you might as well just say what you think at that point, mightn't you? Because what's the point? You know that the worst is coming. Yeah. And he managed to avoid it, as we said. He apparently jumped off the gallows.
Hopefully he did. Yeah. I'd like to think so.
So that was the plot blown. And so word gets out that Guy Fawkes has been arrested. The rest of the conspirators, they go ahead with the second part of the plan, the coup. They fled. They go north to the Midlands, and Catesby, for whatever reason, I don't know what sort of grip he had on the other conspirators, but he pushes on and says, "No, we're going to continue. We're going to rally the banner. We're going to rally the people to our banner." And they go around the Midlands. They go to Warwick Castle and steal a load of horses and weapons from there. And they end up at, like we've mentioned, at Holbeach House, and this is where the standoff is with Catesby and who else is there? Winter's there, Thomas Percy's there.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, the night before they're found, they have some powder with them, and it got saturated. So what they decide to do is lay out the powder next to the fire to dry.
You can't make this shit up, can you?
You can't make it. Yeah, it's Keystone Cops, isn't it? So guess what happens? It blows up. Catesby gets burnt. Loads of them get burnt and injured. And the next day, the King's men arrive, 200 of them, to Holbeach House, and there's a shootout. It doesn't last long. They reckon that it was the same.
One bullet got two men.
Winter and Percy and Catesby.
Right.
Who were already injured.
Right.
But yeah, so, they took one bullet between them apparently, and Catesby died clutching a picture of the Virgin Mary.
Oh, right.
So the story goes. Yeah, so that was the end of the plotters.
Yeah.
They didn't get any support, when they were rampaging around the Midlands trying to rally support with the other recusants. Like, no one was interested.
Yeah.
Like, it was absolutely doomed to fail.
Yeah, dreadful business.
So, a good chunk of the conspirators, a handful died at Holbeach House, and then the rest were fairly quickly rounded up in London and the surrounding areas. And
I would have much preferred to have been one caught in Holbeach House and had a fighting chance of, at least take one down with you.
Absolutely. And they'd made the minds up that they were going to die there. Catesby said, we will die here. This is the last stand.
It's a bit like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid,
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, we just got to leave and do what we can. Yeah.
And so, I mean, the ironic thing is, the thing that brewed this discontent was sort of multi-generational, what's the word?
Feuding.
Yeah, persecution.
Yeah, persecution.
Yeah, so like these conspirators, their dads had been imprisoned and fined and impoverished.
Yeah,
via
so they're going to
fines.
grow up, hating the state, but did that to their parents and so on. And
and because
you've just got to break that cycle somehow, haven't you?
Absolutely, yeah. It doesn't. Violence doesn't lead anywhere.
No.
But the ironic thing is, because of their actions, this allowed James to bring back even more laws and more fines, and Catholics were persecuted even harder afterwards. Then maybe they would have been. Maybe they would have been. Yeah.
In time, yeah.
So yeah.
And just a minor thing that sort of came to my mind was they came out with this rhyme, the gunpowder, treason, and plot. How does it go now? Gunpowder,
remember,
treason, plot. Remember, the 5th of November, gunpowder, treason, and plot. It should never be forgot. Is that something like that?
I can never remember the second half.
Yeah, but it
should never be forgot.
Yeah, it should never be forgot. And I was thinking about that and thinking, well, it's quite a cool little ditty at the time, and it's lasted all this time, and it's like an advertising jingle.
Wow.
And if you think about it, it's like, in fact, it has been an advertising jingle in my lifetime in England, and yours. It's you could compare that to what's gone on in the last 2 to 3 years, with the way that they pushed certain things on the public and made them repeat things, safe and effective, and various other things as well, which, like, mantras is the word I'm looking for. They're like mantras. And it's a way of instilling this propaganda, if you like, in people's brains, so that it's just there and it's ready to pull out. The power of those little jingles, and whoever put that together was very, very good at what he did.
Yeah, I wonder where it came from, that rhyme. That's something I've not looked into, where the rhyme sort of originated from.
Yeah.
Because after this event, it was sort of designated as a Protestant holiday. It was celebrated every year.
So the Observance Act, wasn't it? Was that right?
That sounds right, yeah.
Yeah, I've got it written down somewhere. Oh dear, where was it?
They'd ring the bells on the 5th of November, and it was another Protestant festival for a couple of hundred years, I think.
Yeah, it says 1606, an Act of Parliament passed called the Observance of 5th of November. And it enforced an annual public day of Thanksgiving.
Wow.
They had to attend church, and there was a special sort of gunpowder service, celebrating it. And then I forget when they it was like an act you had to go. I mean, I'm not sure everyone probably did, but I don't think it's probably one of those laws that they never really enforced. After a few years, it's probably forgotten.
Yeah, I don't know how. It was similar to the recusant laws, but that Elizabeth had as well. This sort of thing where you have to go to church, or you would pay fines, or be imprisoned, or whatever. Yeah, but how long it lasted afterwards, I don't know.
Yeah,
because in fact, would it have lasted past the revolution? I mean, it would have stopped during the revolution, maybe, or the Civil War. I don't know.
Well, obviously, the other thing was, like, as you mentioned earlier, I mean, the Spanish thing sort of drew to a close, and with that, there was less, there's sort of less anti-Catholicism, if you like, probably, as the decades went by. Maybe that's...
Yeah, well, I mean, the Church of England solidified, didn't it, from that point?
Yeah,
and I guess the Catholic threat reduced. It was the last throw of the dice, wasn't it?
Yeah.
For the Reformation, the anti-Reformation movement.
Yeah, I was going to ask you earlier, about population at the time. So you obviously had all these upper class Catholics, mostly upper class, I presume. Now I'm just trying to think. So most of the Irish, like, that some of them you're descended from, came over to the northwest of England, didn't they? But that was later, after the Industrial Revolution, probably.
Yeah.
So what was the population like in terms of sort of everyday Catholics? I mean, what in proportion to the Protestant at that time?
A minority, very much a minority.
Oh, it was a very small minority. Right?
I've heard numbers of the number of recusants being around 5,000.
Oh, right.
In the country.
Yeah, that's not a lot, is it?
But these are the hardliners, the people who refuse to obey the laws of going to church. On top of them, you have the church papists, as they were called.
Yes.
Who were Catholic in their heart, but they sort of went along for an easy life.
The cloth ears.
The cloth ears, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so overall numbers, I think it's hard for them to even get sort of good estimates, isn't it, probably?
It could be 10,000 or something. You know?
Maybe, but it's definitely a minority.
Yeah, so they were never really going to maintain power on that basis,
No. And this is only England as well. I mean, the situation is different in Scotland. You know, Scotland's much more Catholic at this point, very much so.
Yeah.
So, but James, although he unites the crowns of the two countries, they still remain separate kingdoms. So, as we said earlier, James the Sixth of Scotland comes down to become James the First of England and unites the two crowns. But the two separate kingdoms with separate laws, separate parliaments, we've got to wait another 100 years for the Act of Union.
Right.
To actually create sort of Great Britain as we recognise it today, where everything is united.
Yeah.
So, it's James did try and do it in his reign. He tried to unite England and Scotland wholesale, but there wasn't the support there.
No.
There was several more Jacobite rebellions and Bonnie Prince Charlie to come and all that stuff, and the Battle of Culloden and all the rest of it.
When you look back at the people that, the Scots have produced, that have done so much for the world. I mean, incredible things, and not just for Scotland. I mean, English did it as well, and the Cornish did a lot. I mean, the Cornish did loads. They went all over the world, sort of, with their mining and their skills and so on. But just for such a tiny country to have such a huge influence, it's fantastic. And the Scots, they, as they went all over the place. It's just the Cornish did that as well, but they're lesser known because there's far fewer of them.
Yeah.
But, engineering and so on, just fantastic stuff everywhere. Australia, America, you name it. They've been all over.
I wonder how much of that you can put down to the Royal Society when that was formed shortly after this period.
I don't know. How explain that one? I don't know that.
Oh, it's something I was researching earlier in the year, or maybe it was last year. I can't remember. But the Royal Society is sort of a couple of decades after this.
Right.
It sort of starts around the 1620s, and then it gets its royal charter from Charles I around 1650, 1660, something like that. And this is where like Christopher Wren and Boyle and these sort of, it's the first sort of scientific society.
Oh, right.
And it was sold to Charles I from a technological point of view. We get all these people together. It's shortly after the restoration of the monarchy in Charles II. Right. And it was sold to him like, we'll get all these people together. We've got
all these really bright people together,
Yeah, and sort of look at how we can improve the Navy.
Yes.
Sea-going technology. We want to solve the problem of longitude. Christopher Wren was working on that.
Yeah, he did St. Paul's Cathedral as well, didn't he?
Yeah, well, he pretty much rebuilt London after the Great Fire.
Oh, right.
He played a big part in that, didn't he?
Yeah,
he did a lot of the architecture for that.
Yeah.
But
because that wasn't that long afterwards, was it? Really, a few decades. Yeah.
It's such a fascinating period. You've got the Black Death going on.
Yeah.
You've got the Civil War. You've got the Stuart Restoration. You've got the Royal Society and Freemasonry. Yeah. Freemasonry and the Royal Society are very closely tied.
Okay.
And through Sir Robert Moray, he's the guy who was sort of the brains behind founding the Royal Society, and he was a Freemason. He got Charles II, the restored king, into Freemasonry. It's very interesting history, and to couple that with Francis Bacon, Shakespeare, And you've got the Shakespeare authorship question at this period as well.
Yeah, what was this guy who supposedly, what was his name? The other guy who supposedly wrote all the works of Shakespeare.
There's a couple of candidates.
Right.
So, I mean, most people just assume that that guy on the picture, that guy from Stratford, wrote Shakespeare. But it doesn't take much textual, literal analysis if you read Shakespeare to know that the author, he had to know ancient Greek, he had to know Latin, he had to know Roman history, Greek history, mythology, agriculture, architecture, classical history. Right. Whoever wrote that was supremely well educated.
Right.
In all aspects.
And what was Shakespeare's background?
We've got 3 signatures?
Right.
That's it. They reckon he was an actor. There's no contemporary evidence that he wrote any of it. On his daughter's, I think it's his daughter's marriage certificate, she signs her name with an X. So she's illiterate. So you're telling me the guy who wrote all those plays,
wouldn't have trained his daughter,
had this vast knowledge of, not just, I mean, an absolute genius, and he didn't bother to teach his children to read or write?
Doesn't make sense, does it?
So, I mean, that's the first step. The first step in this rabbit hole is...
I've never been down that one yet.
The first step is, what's the evidence that the guy from Stratford wrote it? And it's slim pickings.
Right.
So then you get onto the candidates. Some say Francis Bacon.
Right. There was somebody, Christopher something, wasn't there? Christopher something.
Edward de Vere.
Right.
Edward de Vere is a good candidate. He was known as a playwright, and he was known to write anonymously as well. And he has the educational background.
Right.
Francis Bacon is another good candidate. He is a genius to start with. He has the intellectual capacity and the education. The one thing that hangs me back from jumping in the Bacon camp is he's already such a prolific guy in his writing and stuff. And so to have the time physically and mentally to write all those plays as well,
right,
that's something that sort of sways me maybe against Bacon. But I don't know. We don't know. But I mean, the first step is to say, well, it wasn't that guy from Stratford.
Who it wasn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's growing. It's been bubbling on. People have been arguing this for 200 years or more.
Oh, right. I thought it was a fairly recent thing.
No, there's books from the 1800s questioning the authorship of Shakespeare.
Right.
So, yeah, it's one of those interesting rabbit holes to go down. In fact, we did an episode with Robert Frederick, and he does a podcast called The Hidden Life is Best.
Right.
So if you want to learn about possibly Francis Bacon being the Shakespeare author, I'd recommend his podcast, and when he came on our show as well. Can't remember what number episode it was, but we went down the rabbit hole with him on Francis Bacon being the author. But.
Yeah, that's fascinating stuff. Yeah. Oh, one other thing, getting back to the old bonfire night. As you know, in the 70s, we had all the back garden bonfires, and then the establishment started to sort of dissuade us from having these fires in the garden. They used the old safety thing, as now this could be. I mean, they were dangerous for some people, but yeah, they used the safety angle, and they gradually sort of pushed over to these bigger sort of village displays and so on, which of course then had to get insurance. And then nowadays, supposedly the insurance is so high that people just don't bother a lot of the time. But getting back to when this happened, I think it was early 70s when probably they gradually started sort of dissuading us from using our gardens. I mean, they couldn't outright stop us, but there was enough discouragement out there that people did stop at that time. I mean, I can't remember seeing too many bonfire parties in gardens after the late 70s, I'd say. And I wondered about that because if you take it to the early 70s, when I think this movement was coming about, what did we do in the early 70s, the very early 70s, as a country? What did we join? Have you thought about that?
Is this the common market?
Yeah. Well, it used to. Yeah, it was called common market then, wasn't it?
I think so.
And I wondered about that because you earlier on you mentioned France and Spain are basically Catholic countries. I'm not sure whether Spain were a member in 71. I think it was 71 we joined, wasn't it? And I did wonder whether there'd been some sort of backroom discussions. And they sort of said, well, you can join us, but there's a few things you're going to have to stop. And one of them was burning Catholic martyrs. Is there anything in that?
Do you know?
I mean, it was kept quiet. If that's the case, I never ever saw anything like that. But it just made me wonder.
It's an interesting question. I would say
because it is a bit how can I put it?
It's insensitive.
Not very, insensitive.
I mean, to be fair, the Spanish king at the time denounced the plot,
right,
publicly,
right.
I think he called them like wild Protestants. Actually, the plotters. Yeah, they didn't want anything to do with it.
Oh, it's nothing to do with us. Yeah, they're Protestants doing that. It's a false flag.
Maybe. Who knows?
Yeah.
Hey, there is theories that it was essentially a false flag and that Cecil was in on the plot from the beginning.
Right, and then they just did these poor buggers in.
Just for the PR, the political capital.
Yeah.
Extract some more fines, some more land.
A scary thought.
Yeah, it's not something I've really looked at. There's probably not much hard evidence for it, but you wouldn't expect them to keep that sort of evidence, would you, if that's what they were doing?
No, that's right.
No, because it is it's kind of a bit Hollywood, isn't it? The way the plot ends with him being captured, literally hours before a world-changing event would take place, but... I mean, the Spanish denounced the attacks, but I don't know. Would the Europeans in the 70s would they be that bothered about?
I don't know.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing to think about, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't think. I mean, but to an outsider, again, like we said right at the start of this discussion, to an outsider, they would see it as possibly they'd see it as an anti-Catholic thing. Whereas we know, growing up as kids, my parents had no idea about any of it. Well, my dad would have done, but there was never any religious thing. I mean, my own dad wasn't religious. It was just a good night out.
Yeah.
And happy memories, really.
I mean, to me, it's an act of terrorism. It's religiously motivated mass slaughter.
Yeah, I mean, we worry about, but we look at the punishments that were meted out and we go, oh, that's barbaric. But like you say, what they intended to do would have probably killed a lot more people.
Well, sounds horrible to say this, not that many Catholics were killed during these persecutions.
Oh, right.
So I've heard, I think, estimates that maybe 200 were killed during Elizabeth's reign. It's a long reign, 45 years.
Yeah. That
200 recusants were mainly priests, mainly the actual priests that they caught.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, it's a hard thing to argue against because I'm all for tolerance, religious tolerance and freedom of thought and expression and speech. So, I don't like any of it. I'm not trying to excuse any of it or anything like that. But, I don't know about the European question.
No, I'm not saying it's true. I'm just saying
it's just
it's just a thinking point, isn't it? It's like
a thought experiment, isn't it?
It's just funny how it did coincide. I think it did coincide. I think it was. I'd have to check again, but I think it was 71 that we joined.
Right.
Actually, I've got sort of memories of that time because I was 10, coming on 11, and we used to holiday in the Isle of Wight
Mm.
on the back side of the Isle of Wight, a place called near Cowes. And from there, you could watch the yacht. We used to watch these yachts going through the Solent, the little stretch of sea between the mainland and the Isle.
Absolutely.
And there was a yacht we used to see regularly, which was Morning Cloud, which was Ted Heath's yacht.
Oh.
And he was the main guy that got us into it.
Am I right in thinking that we joined and then it was a year later or something where they had the referendum?
I don't know that. I don't know.
I seem to think that we joined the market and then had the referendum after to rubber stamp it.
Yeah. All I know from looking back at it now, I know at the time the average punter in the street just thought it was a business club where businesses could trade with each other and so on. I mean, I've got memories of pre-71 being a little boy when in the shopping cart, your mum would get like New Zealand lamb and South African whatever. And so we were trading with these other countries, Canada probably. So we were trading with all these sort of long distance countries mostly. And then it all changed and we were told you've got to deal with this, So we started getting stuff from Germany and France and so on, which is good, but we never really saw the rest of it after that. And I know that it was supposed to be a business club for like helping trade. Mm. And then gradually, and I believe this was the original purpose.
Absolutely, yeah.
It was planned that we were going to be part of this big super state,
Yeah, it was sold. It was sold as an economic agreement, which I think most people wouldn't have a problem with. I think most people want free trade. Free trade sounds like a good idea.
Yeah,
but this morphed into a political union.
Yes, and I think that's where we went wrong.
And it's morphed into a monetary union, and we had the euro. A monetary fiscal union, and obviously people are a bit sort of uncomfortable with that. My saying is like, I want my politicians. The furthest I want my politician away is at the end of my arm, so that I can wring their neck when they get it wrong. The last thing, it's bad enough that our politicians are in London, in the London bubble, never mind in another country, making decisions for us. Yeah, I'm all sort of for local stuff and local responsibility and decision making.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I've sort of come around to that way of thinking sort of in later life, but I used to be very much the other way. But I mean, people have this opinion that if you're not sort of pro EU or whatever, you must be some sort of you must be some sort of right wing nutter, or you must hate foreigners or something. It's absolute bull.
Were you in the country when the referendum campaign was happening in 2016? Was it?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, because I heard it all the time in the media, like in the aftermath. People who voted Leave were typically uneducated.
Oh, it's just absolute sort of just ignorant tropes,
Yeah.
Yeah, just crazy.
People seem to think that people will just be fooled by some numbers on the side of a bus, and that'll be enough to sway the vote. And I mean, it's one of them.
I'm sure there are people that just we know there are people who just follow the crowd anyway.
Mm.
But I don't know what to say about that. It's just like one person can't change it. You can only just put up with whatever it is and make the best of it.
Absolutely.
So
we're here for a good time, not a long time.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. So have we covered the? Oh, I'll tell you what we didn't mention.
Oh.
Did you read that piece? Did you listen to that piece about the Guildford Guy riots?
I did, yeah. I knew nothing about this.
No, and a lot of people don't. I didn't know until, I don't know, 5-6 years ago. I just stumbled upon it and I thought, well, I should know that. I grew up in the town.
Right.
Why didn't I know?
So what was the story with this?
my friend I was chatting to the other day in Ireland, who is from my town in England, um, he had no idea. He had no idea about it either. So, do you want me to give you a quick rundown of the story?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, have you got time?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm fine.
Okay. So, let me just remember now. So, after the whole idea of bonfires and that came out of the fact that after this plot was foiled, people supposedly lit all these bonfires and celebration, and then this sort of you had the Acts of Parliament and so on, sort of like encouraging the celebration of it as the decades went on. And then by the time we get to, so it's a tradition that had been well established. By the time we get to the 1820s, Guildford, which is like an hour south of London, for anyone who doesn't know, they were starting to have these annual Guy riots. And basically, it was just complete mayhem where all the local villages, and I was raised in one of those villages, so I'm quite proud of this. They're very sort of quiet little country villages now, you know.
Mm.
All of the local villages used to congregate on the edge of the town, and a lot of them would be drinking. And it was just like one night a year when they could go crazy, do whatever they wanted to within, maybe not within reason. And they could sort of just the next day would all be back to normal, after the hangover had gone. And they would congregate and they would do this thing where they did this like a banshee wail almost from the edge of a town. And that was like the warning to all in the town, like to, lock up your daughters and whatever, And they would go in and they would have different groups of people who were all like just out for a good night out, But it was just like a Friday night in, I don't know, some of the seedier parts of London a few years ago. And they would go in and they would take doors off of people's front doors. They'd rip the door off. And they would sometimes go in and smash the place up, smash the furniture up, bring it out in the street, in the high street, which is on a hill, beautiful old hill, the cobbled high street, still cobbled. They would build huge bonfires at the top of the hill. And people from all around would be coming with their doors and gates, garden gates, people's belongings, as I say, chuck it all on and they'd have a big fire. The locals wouldn't challenge them because there were too many of them. And some of the locals actually supported them. They would sort of cheer them on. They probably thought it would save them from having their houses wrecked, maybe.
Yeah.
And old grudges would be, sorted out.
Settled, yeah.
Like, magistrates' houses would be burnt to the ground. So it's like real riots going on. And then now I'm trying to work this out. When did Robert Peel? When did the Peelers begin?
Oh, a good question. I think it's after that, but I might be wrong.
Yeah, that's what makes me wonder because
this isn't long after the Napoleonic Wars.
Yeah, so they said that a policeman was there's a couple of things about policemen. A policeman tried to stop it and he was chucked on the fire. He survived his burns and survived, and another one was killed. Another one was beaten to death.
Oh, God.
I'm just trying to think. So Robert Peel, he started off a police force in England in, I don't know, I'd have to check that. But they say that policemen were, so whether they were real policemen or whether they were just paid.
Like sheriffs or something?
Yeah, something like that. It could be. I'd have to look at the dates. But anyway, it got from the 1820s to the 1860s. It really hit the peak in 1860-ish. And that's when this other copper was actually killed, the policeman, for anyone who doesn't know what copper is. And they start in the last years when they sort of put the lid on it, they would send the army down from London and in preparation, like a few days before, and they would arm the local police with cutlasses. And they basically put these riots down and, they just ended because
Well,
many people were getting hurt,
do you know, this fits in because I've just Googled it, and Robert Peel formed the Metropolitan Police in September 1829.
Wow.
So that ties in, doesn't it? It's maybe a reaction to this.
Yes. Yeah. But supposedly they never came out in numbers like you'd see now. If there's a riot, there'd be loads of them.
Mm.
But it was supposedly just the odd one that went out and did his job. Wow. So that was going on. The Guildford Guy riots, we call them.
And when did it end? Did they know when it started happening? Did it just fizzle out, or did the police put it down, or what?
Yeah, the police put it down, but the army put it down, really.
The army.
Well, both really, but the 1860s. I haven't got a specific day, but it was like in the 1860s.
Wow.
So that's not really that. When you think about it, that's not that. It's not that long ago, really. I mean, it's like, if you think of like the First World War was like, what, 1914? So it's not that long before that.
50 years.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's weird how that escaped me. Somebody who was born there. No one ever used to talk about that. And it's only in recent years that you see it in all the Guildford newspapers. They all talk about it now.
Really?
Yeah. So
around this time of year, they bring up the sort of history of it,
yeah, it always comes up. Yeah, there's always a piece on it in the last sort of 10 years or so.
And I wonder why it didn't catch on. Why is it just Guildford,
Well, yeah, why Guildford? I mean, if you know Guildford now, Guildford now is a very, very affluent town. It's like it's a strange, it's a beautiful Surrey town in amongst all the hills. Beautiful countryside. Mostly, if you walk around some parts of Guildford, and I used to on the way home from the pub to go back to my village, I would walk past these properties. Like I knew all the little shortcuts across the hills and stuff, and I sort of cut up some posh road, and there's a little footpath, and if you cut across someone's garden, it would take you into a field, which would take you to a footpath, which would get back to my village.
Yeah.
And this was a regular thing when we were growing up and going into the town. You'd never get a bus home. There weren't any buses at that time of night, so you just walked home. And I used to walk past these properties and think to myself, well, what do these people do for a living that they can afford these places? I mean, it wasn't just like a little one road of them. We're talking about huge areas where they all had massive, beautiful houses, like brick built. Like some of them were like, any era really, like 1920s, 1900s, a bit before that, some of them. Just beautiful houses, great big gardens, trees, real luxurious places.
Mm.
And if it had just been a few, like in most towns, there's like an area, that's for posh people there, Guildford is just covered in it. But it also had council estates like dotted around where they were the opposite. They were like really tough neighborhoods that you didn't want to be caught there if you weren't from those estates.
Yeah.
I mean, I know of an example of that. I mixed in both circles because I was a choir boy.
Right.
So so I came from a council estate, but I was in the choir. So some of these lads that I mixed with are good lads. They were posh kids. Their dads were solicitors and bank managers and all these sort of jobs. And I remember one of them came up to visit me on my estate. And I wasn't even on a rough estate. I was on an estate, but it was a nice one. And he came to visit me on his bicycle, like brand new. Do you remember the drop handlebars, derailleur gears and all that?
Mm.
And it was brand new. And he came up the road, and some lads on my street who knew me basically stopped him. And they said, "Where do you think you're going?" But you don't live up here. And he sort of said, "Well, I'm going to see my mate." "Who's your mate?" And they were like giving him the third degree, back to the third degree again. I said, "Well, who's your mate?" And he said, "Well, Mark Wyatt." And he said, well, you can't be one of his mates. You're a posh kid or something, words to that effect. He said, "Oh, I know him. I know him." Anyway, they didn't rough him up too much, but do you remember kids used to wear cycle clips?
Mm.
They took his cycle clips and they broke them. I think they gave him a nosebleed or something. It wasn't terrible. And he came up and he never came back up there again.
Not surprised.
But that's what it used to be like. You know, it was like tribal.
Yeah. Yeah, class warfare.
Yeah, but when I went on to their estates, they never treated me like that. So that's the way I live. I think, yeah, live and let live.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I agree. Oh, well.
That was probably down to my mother, though, because she used to make us speak properly.
Oh, did you go for elocution lessons?
Oh, she now, even saying what I'm going to say will give it away, because I used to get threatened, right? See, I can't say th. I never have been able to. It's just impossible for me to say it. And it used to drive my mum crazy. She used to say, "Speak properly, say it properly." And I just couldn't. I couldn't get my lips and my tongue around it. I just can't. And if you notice, Cockneys, Londoners generally, they don't. They pronounce it with an F.
Yep.
It's just the way they do it. And I'm like them. I'm more like them than I am like a Surrey boy. So, yeah, she used to try to get me. She used to say, "I'm going to send you to speech elocution lessons." And I'm like, "No, I'm not going to do that."
Are you threatening me?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah.
That's one of the wonderful things about our country is the diversity of accents.
Oh, I love
it. Me.
I love it. And that's one of the reasons why, if you go back to that EU discussion, that's one of the reasons why I loved it. I think each country, if we get sort of sucked into this sort of homogenous sort of, you know, where everyone sounds the same, everyone's, you know, doing the same syllabus and all this, and we'll all be the same. And I think our strength is in our uniqueness. Like, we're all different.
Yeah.
And I love it. I've moved around, you know, England. I've lived in the northeast. I was mixing with Geordies.
Why?
And they were fantastic. I mean, really great lads. Yeah. And then I was in Cornwall for a long time, and I'll be back to Cornwall soon at some point. And again, they're different. You know, I think of all of them, and Surrey was great, of course, that's where I'm from. But it's a job to hold one against the other. I think they're all great in their own way. You see, so
yeah, absolutely.
And my brother lives up your way.
Oh, does he? Near the wall, the ice wall.
Yeah, he lives in Leyland.
Oh, crikey, that's a hop, skip, and a jump.
Is it?
Yeah, it's like 10 miles, 15 miles from me.
Oh, right.
Yeah, Leyland.
Yeah. He's been up there a long time.
South of the water, we say.
Oh, is it?
South of the Ribble.
Yeah, he loves it. I mean, I see all, you know, he loves the countryside and the canals and all that sort of stuff, you know.
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Well, Mark, we've done 2 hours already, nearly.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm waffling on now.
It's all right.
I think we exhausted the bonfire thing. I think we covered just about everything, didn't we? But,
yeah, everything important, I think.
Yeah.
If we missed it, let us know in the comments.
No, I think... Yeah,
smash that like button.
Yeah, fat lot of good you two are. You don't know that at all.